Hey everyone, my name is Kamya Chandra. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Global Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, where we support many countries, including many African countries, on their design of digital public infrastructure. Um, Thank you so much for joining today. We have a really exciting panel with a lot of deep sectoral expertise planned. Um, Xavier, I'm not sure if you'd like to introduce the panelists today that we have so that we can dive straight into the content today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kamya. I will do that. Welcome everyone. I'm Xavier Martin, Chief Operating Officer at Digital Frontiers. Whether it's morning or afternoon where you are, I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Puneet Joshi, the Chief Technology Officer at OpenG2P, joining us. And we are also pleased to welcome Jacqueline Jumah, the Director of Advocacy and Capacity Development at AfricaNenda, and Kamya Chandra, the co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer at the Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, who will be moderating this panel and helping us to keep the conversation going. So Jacqueline, Puneet, and Kamya, thank you so much for joining us today at the Pathway 17 Summit. Today's discussion, as you know, will focus on the African perspective on digital public infrastructure. We will be exploring the transformative impact of open source digital infrastructure in Africa with a spotlight on key areas such as digital identity, payments, and data exchange. With that, I think that I will hand it over to you, Kamya, to lead and facilitate this conversation. Again, thank you, the three of you, for joining us.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Xavier, and a very warm welcome to Jacqueline and Puneet. I think we're going to have a very rich discussion today on the nuances of DPI in payments and how countries can actually leverage this and take it forward in the African context. Maybe we can get started, Jacqueline, with you. As a core member of the leadership team at AfricaNenda, what have you framed as sort of, the answer to the question, what is DPI in payments? What does it mean to be DPI in payments? Because digital payment systems have existed for decades, right? So this idea of DPI is a little newer. So if you can maybe frame for our audience, what does it mean to be digital public infrastructure for a payment system? And why is it important or powerful in an African context? That would be great to hear.
Okay, very well said. Thank you. DPI, okay, so I like the question when you said, how are you framed? Because we have not reframed, because I guess there's so many definitions for DPI. But the one that rings true is the G21, because it's simple and it presents DPI as a public good that can transform societies and just provide that opportunity to increase financial inclusion by making digital payments available to everyone. And when you look at the DPI concept from the G20 perspective, it also emphasizes that the DPI aims to unify public efforts to build the national digital infrastructure needed by modern digitally driven economies. So in its simplest explanation, it's just the foundation for financial inclusion, basically, from a payments perspective. Over to you.
Fantastic. I like the simplicity of that definition, certainly, because it allows for us to really think through what does it mean to be foundation? Does that mean that any kind of digital payment system operates as a DPI, or are there certain characteristics that we look for?
I think that's a good, follow-up question, because not any payment system can drive this agenda, and that's why at AfricaNenda we include. We emphasize on the inclusivity of instant payment systems. So somebody might wonder, isn't that the same thing, or are you not talking about the same thing? So we have coined this narrative about how you can have an instant payment system Yes, it's real time. Yes, it is delivering in terms of the 24/7 availability and so on, and all the other factors that that accompany any typical instant payment system. But the inclusiveness or the inclusivity aspect is what delivers in terms of that payment layer for the DPI. That inclusivity is what enables that payment system to facilitate transactions in a manner in which it would be a public good. And when you look closely at that inclusiveness, or what we mean by the inclusivity of instant payment systems, you'll begin to see attributes like this is a payment system that ensures that it facilitates or supports as many use cases as possible, responds to as many needs in terms of the channels that the users need to use as much as possible. There's inclusive governance where you have not only the banks making decisions, but you have the fintechs who are connected to the payment system making decisions, for example. It allows for non-commercial banks to plug and play, and so many other attributes, like, for instance, even touching on consumer protection. So that inclusiveness is what delivers this particular piece of infrastructure to respond to that DPI need from a payment layer perspective.
Lovely. And I love that framing, because digital payments is often seen as this like advanced cutting edge thing that's, every country needs to do to move their country ahead. But if we frame it from the perspective of inclusion, is when that foundation that you're talking about actually occurs for everyone in society. So typically we talk about instant payments, we talk about interoperable payments, those are the baseline, but like adding that third criteria of inclusivity, I think, is very powerful to make sure that that's what makes it DPI. And why would you say this is particularly important for the African context? If I can, prod you on this, like, countries can be working on any number of infrastructure. Why should they prioritize payments infrastructure? And what kinds of payment infrastructure? Is it just peer-to-peer, peer-to-merchant? Should they also do government payments? Should they do B2B payments? Like, if you can talk a little bit about that, then I think it'll set the stage for hearing from Puneet.
I think it's an interesting question. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, today we have over 400 million adults in Africa that are financially excluded. It's not that we are, there's lack of innovation. It's not like there's lack of the state-of-the-art technology. It's not like there's lack for, opportunities in terms of what technology could do. It's just simply because what we have currently in the continent is not optimized in terms of the cost, and that is affordability, is not optimized in terms of what sort of use cases respond to what sort of problems and pain points, is not optimized from a point of we still don't have a level and open playing field to drive that innovation that could speak to the needs or the meaningful pain points on the ground. We are not yet there in terms of interoperability, for example. Even in the bastion of mobile money, for example, where I sit in Kenya, I still can't send money to my colleagues in Uganda freely. I'll need to think about, how can I, which sort of third party, which sort of fintech can help me push these funds from my M-Pesa mobile to other mobile. So there's a lot has happened in terms of innovation. A lot is still happening, but there are those bits and pieces that if we take care of, can make sure that these excluded 400 million adults in the continent also participate. And the way to go about this is to think about what DPI could do from that perspective, because this is basically a public good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I appreciate the framing. I mean, 400 million is a huge number, and the ability to empower someone with payments really allows them to do everything in their lives, whether it's, earn their income or their, commercial spendings or GDP level impact. So it's lovely to hear you frame that. Maybe coming to you, Puneet, what is this acronym OpenG2P? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do with this open source project? what unique capabilities maybe it has, and how you hope it'll help the African ecosystem.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good evening, everyone, and pleasure to be with all of you. Yes, let me decode Open G2P. Well, G2P stands for government to person. So our concern is the services that are delivered from government to person, specifically social benefit transfers. And open, well, it's an open source a DPG. So it's an open source platform. We have software building blocks, I would say interoperable building blocks to deliver G2P services. Right now, our focus is more on the social benefit transfers and cash transfers, digital cash transfers. So that's where we kind of connect to the payment systems. Although, as I said, our concern is bulk payments from government to person. We are not really looking at P2P. However, we would connect to any payment system which offers the bulk payment. So overall, we are a DPG, digital public good. We are philanthropic funded, and we have several building blocks to stitch this delivery chain from registry building to program management to cash transfer. So such components have been developed. They can be installed individually. So like a DPI, each of them can be installed and used, reused, because it's interoperable independently. And so that's what our overall, that's what we are trying to do.
Fantastic. No, it's good to hear that, and maybe you can speak a little bit about for those uninitiated, maybe what's the value of open source, and why should countries or departments, when they're thinking about DPI for payments, be looking to open source as a viable and useful option?
Excellent. That's always a big question. Open source, and why open source, and should governments adopt open source? Well, I think one of the reasons that I strongly feel that open source really works well for governments is that government can own the code. I think that's a big point here from my point of view, because proprietary solutions, generally governments are not able to have control on the code, the source code of the whole software, and so they are perennially dependent on vendors to make changes or enhancements and so on. So that's one big factor, that governments can own the code. Second, I would say because the code is open source, there can be several contributions coming to the enhancements of the code specifically for the country from the community within the country as well. For example, you could have educational institutes contributing to the code. You could have the government staff, contributing. You can have the ecosystem, the private ecosystem, contributing the code and enhancing it. And so, open source, the code being open source, allows you to do, all this offer contributions. And third thing, which we will cover later as well, is because it's open source, it's subject to scrutiny and inspection. And so the code quality, the security aspects can actually be enhanced because the code is open to public and it's for public scrutiny, and available for audit and so on. So I would say these are some of the important reasons why open source is great for governments. Not to say that proprietary should not be used, but definitely open source has a lot of value, in my opinion.
Makes sense. And there's something, quite compelling, I guess, on the fact that around reinventing the wheel, right? Like, I mean, isn't there a cost implication of thinking through, and an effort implication around open source versus trying to build things from scratch?
Well, I mean, that's a separate aspect, whether you should build from scratch or you should reuse, right? So one thing is the open source project that we are working on, we are making sure that we are not repeating something that is already there, especially as a DPG. We are making sure that we are reusing other DPGs. And again, because they are open source available, we can reuse them. So we need not build them. So that's another, I would say, a great advantage of open source, that I can use other open source tools or rather than building them. So yes, we need not build the same thing again, and rather use what's already available. So yeah, Kamya, what I mean is, we don't need to do the same thing again. Because it's open source, we can use it, some other aspects. And in fact, we are using so many of the tools that are already available. And we could happily use them, modify them for our needs because they're open source.
No, fantastic. Jacqueline, I'm curious to get your view on this. What do you see as the value for African countries building payment systems, and any kind of payment system, right? Not just, of course, government to person, but peer to peer, peer to merchant, other kinds of use cases. Is there really an advantage to using open source, and how would you frame what that advantage is?
I think, yes, there are advantages. And when you look at DPI with its intention to deliver equitable access to public and private services at a societal scale, you begin to look at some of the characteristics that must be delivered. And these are broadly, the first one, enabling interoperability, where the DPI should provide underlying infrastructure for a variety of use cases, enabled by a diversity of approved tools, technologies, service providers, etc. The second one is the characteristic on delivering scale, or basically what I call societal traction. And this is where the infrastructure is not restricted to specific geography or even within borders to a specific demographic. And then you also realize that there's a third characteristic, which is supporting open standards. And this is where this piece of infrastructure needs to be available to anyone to build on and integrate and innovate. And then lastly, you'd also be looking at operating in accordance with a robust enabling environment when it comes to rules and regulations, as well as to unified and coherent governance frameworks to safeguard people and prevent the misuse, of course. Now, when you look at the value of open source and how it can enable these four characteristics into the payments layer of the DPI, you look at it's really essential. For instance, from enabling interoperability, this is where you have the open source platforms being designed with modular architectures to support multiple APIs and standards, allowing them to integrate with various financial systems. Within interoperability as well, they come with community collaboration, where community-driven development and often open source projects can quickly adapt to any additional requirements as regards interoperability or the evolving needs. The value that can be derived to promote scale. The open source can be developed and optimized to handle large volumes of transactions. And also, with the projection of anticipated growth. And the transparent code base also allows for enhancements that improve performance. And open standards, yes, there's some value that this can be brought about where these open source systems are naturally aligned to open standards, because anyone can view it, use it, modify, distribute it, and so on. In terms of innovation and extensions as well, the developers can create extensions and plugins that comply with open standards and enhance the system's functionality. And then when you look at the last aspect, the last characteristic that I've mentioned and the value that could be derived is on the governance frameworks, where the open source projects would operate under transparent governance models. Often steered by not-for-profit foundations, for example, or philanthropists, and with this comes the strict guidelines and ethical standards that should be adhered to. And then also in terms of security and compliance, which is like one aspect of the value that can be derived, the transparency of the code allows security experts to audit and assure that actually there's a regulatory compliance, and this is proactive in ensuring that the DPI fulfills its mission. So I think from just looking at those four characteristics as simple areas where open source could enhance these 4 characteristics, because these 4 characteristics must be fulfilled to drive the agenda. So I would say, yes, there is value that can be derived.
It sounds like quite broad-ranging value from the technology side to the governance side to sort of even the market, the innovation side as well. So good to hear about that. Tell me, Jacqueline, out of the work that AfricaNenda has done on payments, DPI across the continent, what are sort of the projects or the work that you've supported that you're the most proud of, so that the audience gets a sense of the ways in which AfricaNenda has supported many of these countries on their payments journey?
I think, is it safe to say we are proud of all of those projects that we have supported?
Of course it is.
Anyway.
Maybe you can list like 2 or 3 examples that really stand out for you. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'll share one, because this is largely what is in the public domain, and this is our support to the Rwandan deployment of Moja Loop. I know it's 85% complete, and the system is about to go live by 2024. By the end of 2024, and by this I mean the merchant payments system powered by Moja Loop. And from this, we see the value that it derives, or it presents to the Rwandan RNDPS, because it's cost effective, generally free to use, and can significantly reduce the cost compared to other alternatives. And then it provides enormous flexibility for customization. So since this code is available, it can be modified to meet whatever specific needs. And there's also the community that Moja Loop comes along with to support, that continuously enhancement or continuously enhancing of the software, and also just implementing and managing change and innovation on the platform, as well as the transparency, where the open nature of this code allows every user to inspect and verify its security. Of course, it hasn't been easy from our experience, especially with the backlash that comes with open source software, and especially in payments because of data privacy concerns and so on. And I think at this juncture that we are also driving a lot of effort in capacity development towards these concern areas, especially looking at the bias. I call it a bias, the bias that is there in terms of looking more into the risks than the opportunities. Yeah, but it will go a long way. I believe it's just like any other piece of technology. At the beginning, there are those concerns, but over time, with a greater understanding, implementation grows because of this better understanding and just exploring how much more it can take in terms of delivering on digital payments and enhancing infrastructure. That's just an example I can share, and we can talk offline for more.
So you won't tell us your confidential examples, okay? We get the message. But no, the Rwanda deployment sounds very exciting, and of course, Rwanda already has a functional electronic KYC, which means their banking penetration is higher as well. So it's a powerful base on which to build on, where they can build a payment system that ends up being inclusive, because people actually have banking access. So it's a very powerful place to start. Maybe Puneet, you can share some examples of Open G2P and some of the projects that you're proud of, that you're supporting across the African continent. You can list a couple. You don't have to limit yourself to just one, because I know there's some diversity. But yeah, why don't you tell us?
Yeah, I will at least talk about 2 to 3. We have several deployments in progress, and we are proud of all of them. I will first mention the work we are doing in Ethiopia. And there are 3 projects in Ethiopia. One of them is for the Agricultural Transformation Institute, ATI. Now, in Ethiopia, the majority of food growers are small, holder farmers with 30 to 35%, 35% to 50% lower farm yield than the potential capacity, and there is a food insecurity issues and so on. Now, the Ministry of Agriculture needs some kind of a good quality data on farmers, which they can use for, let's say, crop advisory, market information, and agriculture inputs, and so on. So we have deployed OpenG2P registry module, and this registry module, it's called Farmer Profile. And as we speak, on the ground, the data is being collected from the farmers using very simple tools like offline ODK forms and so on. Now, importantly, while this is going on, the issuance of FIDA ID, which is the national ID of Ethiopia, is also happening hand in hand. So the FIDA ID is, as you may know, it's based on MOSIP, and it's the foundational ID for Ethiopia. So in this process, a farmer is first getting registered on FIDA ID, and then he or she moves to the OpenG2P registry, where farmers are registered into the farmer profile. Now, this work has started, and we have several thousand farmers already registered here. And this data will be used by ATI to provide advisory and crop information and so on. So, and we are expecting this intervention to benefit 17 million farmers. So we are very happy this effort is going on. Importantly, it is integrated with the ID. So the uniqueness of the records in the registry is kind of ensured because of the unique ID integration that we have done. So that's one project. And we have another project going on with the Ethiopian Disaster Risk Management Commission. Now, this is a different use case. This is about food distribution to areas which are affected by drought and other national calamities. So again, the start point is a registry, a clean registry with deduplicated registry of individuals and even internally displaced persons. So this registry is being built again by going on the ground and collecting data, registering them into FIDA ID and the OpenG2P registry. This and further down, this system will use the OpenG2P's PBMS, which is a program management system, to actually disburse food using the data from this registry and then define the eligibility criteria and so on. So this work also is going on the ground. We expect that this will benefit around 15 million people, including around 4 million IDPs, internally displaced persons. Another project I would like to talk about is in Zambia. This is one case where kind of a rapid deployment was required. Now Zambia faces a drought situation. There are around 9 million people affected by drought and so on. And in this particular case, there is a certain insurance money payout that has to be made to few 100,000 households. And the DMMU, which is the Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit, wanted to set up a system to actually make the payouts. And this has to be a digital cash transfer. So again, here it started with a registry building, and we have also set a program management system. And also we have set the digital cash transfer components, which are like a bulk transfer to their mobile wallets and other bank accounts. So the system has been set. It's yet to go live in terms of actually started dispersing the money. But we are very proud of the system because it kind of integrates all the aspects of a delivery chain, and we could do it in very less time. I mean, within few weeks we were able to kind of set this system, and we are hoping that the disbursements will start soon. So these are some of the projects. Their work is actually going on. And Kamya, on this question of DPI, yes, all these modules that we have developed are interoperable. You can share data and so on. So we have made sure that the design is a DPI, such that it's not just for this purpose, but this registries, these program management systems can be used for other purposes as well. And reuse being one of the big characteristic of a DPI.
That's actually quite powerful what you said just there, because of course countries have been building social benefit payment systems for eons again, right? Similar to countries have been doing digital payments for a while. What I'm hearing you say is that the DPI approach, in some sense, to building this means that all three aspects, the identity aspects, the payments aspects and the data sharing aspects that go into building a digital social benefit distribution system, whether it's, the identity of the beneficiary, you're giving them back a credential that they can use to share with any other program. Can you talk a little more about the other two components? How are they reused how is the data sharing enabled, or payments, whatever payments rails you build, how does it actually power other use cases? How does that work in practice?
Yeah, so registry is easy to understand that it's interoperable. We offer APIs for someone to pull data and use it and so on. Similarly, the program, the beneficiary management system has APIs to know about the beneficiaries of a certain program. For example, you would like to query who are the people who are already getting this money. We want a list and so on. So that capability is there. On the payment side, there are two very interesting modules. One, of course, Jacqueline already knows about them. One is the ID mapper. We call it a social accounts payment registry, which basically maps your ID to the bank account or the financial address information. That module is also available. That can be completely reused by any parties who are interested in knowing the account information of a particular ID. And then we have something.
Sorry, if I can interrupt before you go into the data sharing piece. Why is that important to reuse, or what value does it bring if you can just look up against an ID?
Well, one simple value is that you don't have to collect this data again and again across different schemes, across different programs. So that's one. Second, there is a user is sure where he or she is going to receive the money, because there is a source where this has been captured, and the user has control, or the citizens or the residents have control on where they will receive this money. Now, if this information is spread around several sources, then it's all over the place and it's not really, in some sense, centralized. So I would say this infrastructure should definitely be used. Same reasons, like otherwise, every time you're going to collect the information from the users, while it can be at one place. So that's, I would say that it's definitely such infra can be reused by anyone, any parties in the department.
Makes sense. And then, of course, you spoke about the data sharing side, which is the ability to share the information about who's a beneficiary and what they're...
Absolutely. So offering easy mechanisms of sharing is important. I mean, we all talk about data sharing, but we rarely see it work. So we are kind of putting in efforts that data sharing actually works. I mean, somebody can really query the data the way they really want, and at least technically enabling all this. So we are working on this, and we already have some good mechanisms, of course, subject to improvements all the time.
Lovely. So maybe, Jacqueline, I can come back to you. In the implementation of many of these digital payment systems and in the design of these approaches, have you seen sort of regional or sub-regional nuances that have affected the way you approach, the way you support different countries and different geographies? And maybe you can give a sense of that. Like it's likely not a cut and paste, right, in many of these contexts. And so what are the ways in which some of those, like maybe commonalities across the continent, let's put it that way, on ways in which digital payments have either worked or not worked? And then similarly, maybe sub-regional, if you've seen any insightful differences, that would be useful to get your sense of.
Very well said. I think, yeah. So in terms of nuances, sometimes, yeah, there definitely are nuances in the way these deployments have been rolled out across the regions. And from an IIPS perspective, that's the payments layer. We look at those countries, for instance, where the central bank is involved in or is playing a critical role in driving the inclusive instant payment systems, or in markets where the central bank just gives a promotion or a high level oversight role in terms of how the deployments or how these IIPSs are designed and managed. So there are definitely differences from from these two countries, for instance, with that central bank involvement example, you would see that countries where the central bank plays a key role, for example, in owning and operating, in some instances, the inclusive instant payment system, it's bound to deliver in terms of that digital public good agenda. And, it's linked very closely to the national financial inclusion strategy. And that is clear where, this infrastructure, what this infrastructure intends to deliver. But in markets, when you look at markets where the central bank has hands-off involvement, you will see that, the tendency for these instant payment systems to be profit-driven, of course, and not for loss, for example, recovery, and thus this dilutes the public good in the deployment itself. That's just one example. The second example is in markets where the payment systems allow for non-bank participants to play a role and also contribute to the decision making in terms of, for instance, the rules of trade. The rules that govern the scheme, vis-a-vis in markets where it's the banks calling the shots, and again, a lot of bias with prudential guidelines and licensing and so on. So definitely from an implementation, there are nuances, and these nuances have an implication in how, number one, the instant payment systems, the instant payment systems are going to derive the incentives for the participants. And participants, I mean the financial service providers within the market. So to play or not to play, why should I spend time and money investing in my payment system and then tomorrow I open up to you? So these factors begin to play down on the incentives for participants, and as well as the cost implication to the end user, or the fees accrued to the end user, as well as scaling versus stalling challenges, and so on, because different markets embrace different factors as priorities in building up the instant payment systems. And those markets, from what we see, those markets where the policymakers are handholding the implementation of these payment systems are quicker to deliver on that public good agenda as a DPI, as opposed to those markets that don't have that approach.
No, makes a lot of sense, especially on the different market structures. I think that's a very powerful point. Puneet, any thoughts that you have on what has been the experience, since you have also implemented or worked on non-African contexts? So have there been any interesting regional observations that you have on what are the unique characteristics of implementing on the African continent, and maybe some differences as well of these kinds of efforts?
Yeah, I think some things are common. One is just the infrastructure, right? Availability, for example, connectivity and internet being available and so on. These are the technical points on the ground. When we deal with let's say country like India, where generally we assume that the connectivity is available. However, certain countries in Africa, connectivity is not there. So we have to make sure that our components work in such environments that when there's no connectivity, things should work. So there are other aspects on capacity that also varies country to country. Like in some departments, some governments, we have seen people are very savvy. They are quite technically capable of handling things themselves. While in some other places, they may need much more support, either from the local ecosystem, and sometimes even local ecosystem may not be able to fulfill the kind of needs. So I think in terms of capacity, in terms of infrastructure, basic infrastructure, hardware availability, these simple things like cloud. Generally countries will not go for a cloud like public cloud like AWS and so on, but then not every country has their own clouds. So the infrastructure is a issue which varies from different countries. Yeah, these are the points I can think of in terms of the variations. But of course, then there are cultural variations. on more specifically on what data is collected, how it is collected. Those are, vary from region to region.
No, makes a lot of sense. Jacqueline, maybe coming back to you. Oh, before I should say that if anyone in the audience has questions, unless you want to hear us talk only about what we want to talk about, and for the next remainder of this time, please do post your questions, and we'll try to come up with them.
So, Kamya, there is a question, and up in that one.
I
You
saw
can
one,
answer that
but
very well.
I just wanted to trigger more, just so that we can have a vibrant audience interactive discussion in that sense. But coming back to you, Jacqueline, I know we've looked at open source and kumbaya it a little bit to say it's very powerful. But are there any I won't say risks. Risks is a strong word, but I would say, are there any nuances to designing with open source that countries should be very cognizant and mindful of in their journey? Maybe on the security side, or is the security side not really the problem? How would you characterize maybe the awareness or the areas in which countries need to be really aware and mindful when they are leveraging open source, especially in a sensitive, high volume, high impact topic like payments infrastructure?
Thank you, Kamya. I think I will just tell it like it is. Yes, in many of the countries, we are seeing a lot of concerns. But again, from where I sit, it's nothing different, because even when you look at the different technologies over time, for instance, a good example is blockchain. Like when it was starting, there was a lot of backlash. What is this? It's prone to fraud. It has security concerns and so on. But here we are at a time when the central banks are driving this through the CBDCs. So I think it's natural to have these concerns around open source software and technologies. But I think the most important thing is not to, to zero in on what the perceived concerns, but to just look at several factors that, if well considered, would give a sense in the way that these deployments can be helpful. For instance, and by looking at these factors also, it just requires careful planning, proper implementation strategies, and also a very strong local capacity for managing and supporting these systems. Now, what do I mean by these considerations? There's so many considerations. One you have mentioned is that in terms of the security, where open source software being publicly available might seem more vulnerable, like is a concern to everybody today. And therefore, it requires rigorous security measures and regular updates and so on. I think the robust community scrutiny can identify vulnerabilities, and that's the good thing that comes with open source, because it comes with a community, and there's the opportunity for quicker patches and improvements compared to proprietary options. The other area of spatial address is the customization and flexibility, where the advantage that the open source software offers is that high customizability, which allows systems to be tailored specific to national and whatever needs, or could be regional, could be national, etc. But the challenge is that this customization requires experts, which means investing in skills and so on, and ongoing support as well. So that's also an area to not just assume that, yes, this is the advantage. There are advantages, yes, but you also have to plan around these advantages, build on measures for these, technologies and the infrastructure that they deliver to be meaningful and useful. On the cost effectiveness, there's the consideration for long-term costs, and maybe Puneet can share details in terms of what he's seeing in terms of the long-term costs that might arise from maintenance, customization, and training. And the other thing is the area for another area is on the community and vendor support. There's this concern about the dependence on community support. Some stakeholders see this as a concern. For instance, if a project lacks active development or widespread adoption. And here, perhaps, there's an opportunity to engage with established and active communities that provide that substantial support, especially whether this has been deployed elsewhere or not. Again, matters interoperability, and at least from a payments perspective, ensuring compatibility with existing and future technologies is crucial. And lastly, the other area of concern is usually around legal and compliance, or having legal and compliance issues where the concerns are usually on open source licenses, and which vary and can have implications on how software is used or modified or built upon. And so it's essential to understand the legal obligations from a jurisdiction point of view tied to the software to ensure compliance with local and international laws. Yeah, so in terms of concerns, they'll always be there, because even with proprietary solutions, we've had the risk of fraud and cybersecurity being a really, really big issue. It just calls for looking at some of these attributes and seeing how to best plan, best implement strategies, and also to build the capacity of the stakeholders that are involved in the deployment.
Fantastic. Puneet, anything you want to add to that on the risks or the things to be mindful of?
Actually, Jacqueline covered it so well and comprehensively, but I would still, the points that she mentioned about, I mean, one thing that as a government I would look at is who's supporting the platform. Is the community supporting the platform? Is it active? If there are bug fixes, is there someone to fix the bugs? At least initially, till the government has sufficient capacity to manage the code on its own. I think that's an important factor. Many of the open source projects are kind of abundant, very, and then the government will be in trouble taking such programs. So how active is the development, upgrades, bug fixes, who's behind this project is important as a government, I would think. Now, on the long-term cost, Jacqueline, yes, I mean, initially there are costs involved on capacity building, on managing the whole code. But again, in my general belief is that over longer term, the cost of ownership will be lower, because there will be several more vendors, several more people in the ecosystem who will be, who are ready to take this up, the maintenance or enhancements or changes, and the overall costs should come down because of the competition involved in managing the whole thing. So being an open source. So my take would be that government owning the code is overall going to be in the long term, beneficial in terms of costs.
Fantastic. Nice thumbs up, Jacqueline. Yeah, no. So not all open source is created equal, I suppose, Puneet. So fair point. Maybe we can move to one or two of the audience questions. Perhaps, Xavier, if you'd like to voice some of them, or.
Excellent. Yeah, I can do that, Kamya. Maybe we can start with a question that we are receiving from Amit Gurung. Amit has some concerns around the dependence on a single payment system or a provider, and that's something that usually regulators are not very happy with. That's the statement that Amit is doing, and the question itself is put the example of India, and how the regulators have explored the idea of pushing for the development of other alternative to UPI, to try to avoid having too much concentration in a single institution. The question that Amit has is your thoughts on how that is working in Africa. This type of concerns that happen in India are also there. Is something that you it's concerning for you, and maybe we can have Jacqueline, Puneet, and your own thoughts, Kamya, about this question.
If I may start, yes, there are concerns.
Please,
yes, there are concerns in terms of, okay, in various forums, hearing the same names of the stakeholders, and particularly in Africa, because again, and it's not something to worry, because with the debut of any sort of innovation, the first movers will be few, but over time, that with the competition coming in, there should be some other organizations or institutions that also coming in to provide the same sort of services. So in Africa, yes, for just the how do you call it, the state of not calling names, there are those names that are shining in terms of open source software. But again, there are newcomers from India also playing significant or implementing significant projects in the continent. And my thinking is, if you ask this question 2 years from now, I think it will be very different. The answer will be very different as to how many others have come in from across different spaces to provide open source software. Because at the moment, there are bits and pieces of open source software in the continent being taken up by different projects in different countries at a small scale. A good example is when you have the open source software for microfinance institutions and helping them with interoperability. I think today that is how it looks like. Tomorrow, when you have, for instance, national switches where the microfinance institutions will be playing a role, or the regional payment systems in Africa, that aggregation role is significantly being played by open source software. So for just the lack of naming or calling out the brands or the names that have started off, I think it's a space that is bound to open for more players to come in. It's just that it's emerging. The DPI phenomenon is emerging, and the open source software is emerging, especially from a payments perspective. And I believe there's more to come, and in terms of the types of solutions and the players themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Jacqueline. Puneet, I don't know if there is anything that you want to add on that topic, or should we move for another question that I see from the audience?
Just a point on competition in payments. I mean, although it may not be directly answer this question, but what I do see in the G2P side is that, like today in several countries, the cost of transferring a benefit to a beneficiary is pretty high. I mean, just the commissions on the way for a bulk payment itself is high. And we hope that with more competition and alternate payment systems or channels coming in, this cost will come down. Today, it's a pretty high cost to transfer money in bulk. So I'm hoping, as Jacqueline has mentioned, with more competition and open source may be one of the players, but even other way, we can have lower costs of transferring money from the G2P perspective.
I think just to add to that, Xavier, before you go to the next question, one way to think about it is that we've always had large players in payments, and it's because of economies of scale, right? Globally, there's many sectors where you have country-specific infrastructure, but payments is one of those spaces where you have global companies that are dominant in over 100 countries and so on. The nature of this, it's plumbing, for a country in that sense, and you don't need that many people working on plumbing as long as it works in that sense. But what I would say is the characteristic that you should deploy, and you see, for example, Kenya, has multiple switches that which is the multiple competition model. But I think the criteria to apply is to say, is that switch, let's say, that's running most of the transactions, is it sufficiently interoperable to ensure constant innovation and competition within that segment or not? Right? If you're not seeing constant innovation by the switch that most of the transactions are relying on, then it's time to rethink and say, do we need to change our architecture? But I would say that the way to think about it is to ask that question and to decide based on that, rather than, oh, I'm just scared of having one player. Because many sectors you do have natural duopolies or natural oligopolies. And it's not an issue unless it really hurts the consumer, in that sense. So that's the assessment I would add to Jacqueline's answer there. Yeah, go ahead, Xavier.
Thank you, Kamya. That's like a nice way to look at it. No, look at it. Really, it's constraining innovation and harming the customer. No, I like it. Very related to that, to harming customers and being sure that they are protected, especially with the data they are sharing and payment information that is very sensible. So we have a question from Chris Wolf that want to know your thoughts on what we can do when we are building these kind of systems in terms of protecting the risk, no? That we don't know what will happen in terms of government changing and how we can be sure from the design perspective, no, that the infrastructure that we are creating, it's infrastructure that will be safe for the citizen in terms of, and they will have the right to share what they want to share, regardless of who is in the government or running that infrastructure. We don't have too much time, but maybe I don't know if we can address a little bit this question. And
maybe Jacqueline, yeah, you can take a first stab at it. Yeah.
I think just again, looking at this from the payments layer, there could be those things, several things that could be, considered to just make sure that there's that the consumer is protected basically. And a lot of it has to do with designing the DPI itself, with the considerations for that sharing of data and the robust frameworks that oversee that. One of those things is the user-centric design. So at the beginning, I spoke about the inclusivity of instant payment systems. And one of the things that inclusivity delivers is the ability for the payments infrastructure to cater to as many use cases as possible, from P2P to P2B to G2P to all the tools in between, and at the same time also cater to the needs of the most prevalent channels within the markets. From a governance point of view, the instant payment systems also have to, basically in this context, there's the need to establish clear data policies. Today in the African continent, we don't have a lot of clear, data protection policies, in as much as the African Union is championing this. A few countries are taking the lead, for example, Nigeria, South Africa, and we have others that are following up with guidelines to what data sharing and data protection means. But there's a whole opportunity ahead of us in terms of streamlining this with the understanding of the position that these payments, these pieces of infrastructure stand. So again, within the data governance framework, there's the considerations around the use for data minimization principles, where you collect only the data necessary for specific functions, given that the code is open, for example, from an open source, which is reusable. From examples that I'm hearing from Puneet, that reusability, one of the things that can really ensure that the consumer is protected is by allowing for only harnessing the data that you need. You just harness what you need to do the next thing, because yes, there's the fact that it's reusable doesn't mean that you can reuse it to any extent. So I think that also, as well with the privacy by design principles, where you integrate privacy measures with protections into the architecture of the systems from the outset, is a good place to look at, ensuring that the user data is encrypted, protected, and so on, as well as also introducing some transparency accountability mechanisms, establishing oversight bodies or independent bodies that can monitor the use of data and the operation of the digital systems, all in all, to just ensure that the adherence to the frameworks and the compliance and so on is checked. As well as one important thing also in terms of the sustainability and ethical considerations, where you consider the long-term implications of data use and designing these systems to evolve with the changing technologies. Because today, open source may look like my face, source may look like Kamya's face. So that in itself, the sustainability and the designing with that, I mean, that future-proof designing is one of those things that is also a consideration when it comes to ensuring that the creators design it in a way that is used for the benefit of the citizens.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for this reflection. I think that we are entering the last minute. Unless that there is any last remark, Kamya or Puneet, I think that we need to start to close the conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I wanted to ask one line from both of Puneet and Jacqueline on what is the risk of not building DPI for payments? Last thought, I think, because we talk about the risk of doing. What's the risk of not doing?
Puneet, do you want to go first?
The usual one, lack of competition, right? Proprietary solutions. I mean, it goes back to the previous what's going on so far. So I would say yes, the lack of innovation, right?
Excellent.
Stagnant systems.
Excellent. I think that's a good one. Jacqueline, any one that you want to add, or you are happy with the one that Puneet have put there?
I think I can add two, which are also
Okay.
obvious. There's the costs to the consumers could be unbearable at the end of the day. Secondly, that inclusiveness of the products and services that we see out there would be lacking. And the last one would be scale. It would be very difficult to scale because you need, as it is, we're struggling with the payment solutions are struggling with usage, and that's where there's the call for interoperability, shared infrastructure, and so on. There's an opportunity to, I mean, without DPI, this interoperability conversation is diluted, and so there's duplication of effort everywhere in terms of doing different bits and pieces, as opposed to one scalable payments infrastructure, for instance. And that's where it becomes a cycle. If you're not gaining traction, you're not fulfilling the needs, so you don't have customer numbers, and so it becomes a cycle of challenges. And also taking what my colleague has said in terms of that stifled innovation and competition.
Excellent. I think that's a wonderful end for our discussion. Thank you to our panelists, Puneet, Jacqueline, and Kamya, for this insightful discussion and for sharing your expertise on the role of digital infrastructure here in Africa. And I think that we have gotten a very valuable perspective on the opportunities, the challenge, how open source can be used, and what can provide to this development of digital public infrastructure. So thank you, the three of you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today and participated, and hope the session has inspired you new ideas and collaboration as we work towards inclusive digital transformation. So thank you, everybody. And with that, we will conclude the panel. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the Pathway 17 Summit. Thank you very much.